The Hudson Bay Company Charter is the true enemy and continues this present day hidden. To comprehend how and why all the men and women have no property will be educated in this important video. Please share so we may all become informed to rectify these injustice. Thank you. Knowledge is power, Dallas Hills. We will start here and go deep into the past to connect all the dots to where this all started. From there, we will be able to end the illusion once and for all. Let's get started. Pierre Andre Pare believes that owning a house and owning a car are privileges in Quebec, and that the state should be able to put an end to these. All is privilege conceded by the state: your car, your house, your profession, in short, your life. And what the state gives, you, it can take back from you if you're not a docile taxpayer. Pierre Andre Pare, former Deputy Minister at the Quebec Department of Revenue before a commission of the National Assembly of Quebec. Published by Devoir, April 6, 1996. Council Order 863-96, July 10, 1996. The discretion of a judge is said to be the law of tyrants. It is always unknown. It is different in different men. It is casual and depends upon constitution, temper, and passion. In the best, it is sometimes caprice. In the worst, it is every vice, folly, and passion to which human nature is liable. Justice Charles Pratt, Lord Camden, 1714 to 1794. Smoke and Mirrors and Rupert's Land Act appears in 1670. King Charles II of England formed a charter for a corporation called the Governor and Company of Adventurers of England Trading in the Hudson Bay. It would later be called the Hudson Bay Company, or HBC. The charter comprised 40% of what is now the Canadian landmass, and included much of what is currently the U.S. states of Minnesota and North Dakota. Charles I, King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland, and defender of the faith. The Royal Charter for incorporating the Hudson's Bay Company, AD 1670. King Charles I signed the Hudson Bay Charter over to his German cousin, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, and 17 of Rupert's associates known collectively as the Company of Adventurers. The deed was in the name of the monarch, fully and forever, for all heirs in perpetual succession. It can never be revoked. Rupert held the rights to sole trade and commerce of this enormous land. King Charles I called his cousin and the 17 associates the true and absolute lords and proprietors of what would now be referred to as Rupert's land. Never mind the millions of people whose ancestors, successors, and heirs already inhabited the land, the native people, plus the native settlers. Being born in a specific location on the land makes you native to the land. The DNA Act and the Indian Act were created by the de facto Canada Corporation, which has complete control over all the land and all men and women. Chief and band councils were created by the Corporation of Canada within the Indian Act, which, as you may not know. This video will give you information to do your own research. Educate yourself so we may take the steps to correct this serious injustice that affects us all. This Indian Act is a piece of Canadian legislation, which is why native men and women are tenants, and we can never own the land that was stolen from us through their deception. As it is now, the king and queens and their heirs own all the land, all of whom would come to despise and loathe the ruthless Hudson Bay Company. The Charter's partners ran into their forts and locked up with their cannons in order to stay protected from those on the outside who hated this company. The Rupert's Land Charter controlled 100% of all resources of the land, the fur trade, forestry, minerals, the waterways, and everything else. It was a full-on monopoly, plus they could make their own laws and enforce them. And all members of the HBC, had to take oaths back to the king or queen, as they still do today. No one knows what the actual deal was between King Charles and Prince Rupert, and we are only given a cryptic clue which sounds more like an inside joke. We are told that in exchange for the deed, the Hudson Bay Company owed the British royals 2 beaver pelts and 2 elk heads yearly. One can imagine what one likes, but it might have meant that King Charles I was getting a cut of the profits. Symbolically, the 2 beaver pelts and 2 elk heads might have been a way of saying this business fleeces them, decapitates them, and mounts their heads like trophies. The Hudson Bay Company ran like this for 200 years. From its first beginnings in North America, the HBC pulled a large proportion of men and women into the web of capitalist economy. Being predominantly a trading company, the HBC was dependent on labour to fill its ships headed to European markets. Fur trappers were predominantly originals or métis, but also French, Scottish and others, and worked for the HBC not as partners, but as exploited workers. With 200 years of exploitation of resources, they depleted everything in their path, and financially were no longer a viable company on its own. After all the struggle and competition, it was obvious that the fur trade would soon come to an end. One of the main reasons of the end of the fur trade was that the beavers and other animals' populations were decreasing due to the overwhelming harvesting, depleting the population of a species more quickly than it can reproduce and recover. Under severe economic pressure brought about by their fierce competition, the Hudson's Bay Company and Northwest Company, amalgamated in 1821, and King Charles I of England ordered Hudson's Bay Company to create colonies. The number of beavers and river otters killed during the fur trade was devastating for the animals' North American populations. The natural ecosystems that came to rely on the beavers for dams, river and water management, and other vital needs were also ravaged, leading to ecological destruction, significant environmental change, and even drought in certain areas. Following this degradation, both the river otter and beaver populations in North America would continue to decline, which brought great hardship for the original and settlers. Originals, Métis and settlers' population were devastated by the fur trade, and many hardships and deaths occurred. Still to this day, many are unaware that smallpox was used a biological warfare that was deliberately introduced to exterminate millions. Smallpox used as a biological weapon, once introduced into North America, smallpox spread everywhere, intentionally to kill people. Now here's some alarming information. Unknown in the New World, smallpox was introduced by the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors. The poison decimated the local population and was instrumental in the fall of the empires of the Aztecs and the Incas. Similarly, on the eastern coast of North America, smallpox was planned as a biological weapon and led to a decline of millions of originals, Métis, and settler native population. The devastating effects of smallpox also gave rise to one of the first examples of biological warfare. During the French-Indian War, 1754 to 1767, Sir Geoffrey Amherst, the commander of the British forces in North America, suggested the deliberate use of smallpox to diminish the American Indian population hostile to the British. Edward Jenner, on the history of smallpox and vaccination, National Institutes of Health, NIH, Gov, https://bank.nxtb.gnome.ned.gov, by S. Riedel *, 2005 *, cited by 1350. Unknown in the New World, smallpox was introduced by the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors. The poison decimated the local population. This pattern still apparent today in 2025, with these profit corporation raping everything in their path. The Charter granted the company control of the land, but made no specific demands. This allowed HBC to go about gaining control of the land as it pleased, and had the company chosen to settle the land with people and farms, the history of North America could be quite different. The Rupert's Land Charter controlled 100% of all resources of the land, the fur trade, forestry, minerals, the waterways, and everything else. It was a full-on monopoly, plus they could make their own laws and enforce them. And all members of the HBC had to take oaths back to the king or queen, as they still do today. No one knows what the actual deal was between King Charles and Prince Rupert, and we are only given a cryptic clue which sounds more like an inside joke. We are told that in exchange for the deed, the Hudson Bay Company owed the British royals 2 beaver pelts and 2 elk heads yearly. One can imagine what one likes, but it might have meant that King Charles I was getting a cut of the profits. Symbolically, the 2 beaver pelts and 2 elk heads might have been a way of saying this business fleeces them, decapitates them, and mounts their heads like trophies. The company allowed courts and all the trappings of a regular country, but it was actually a for-profit corporation called the Hudson Bay Company. Everything came down to paying fees and penalties, using the corporate court system to uphold laws and make money. Everything was controlled by the HBC because they had the biggest guns and an arsenal of bioweapons, including diseases and liquor. Anything the common men and women wanted to do, they had to go through the company, such as putting their canoes in the bay. You had to pay to travel the bay. Settlers could not trade with the natives, and if they did, they were fined. Let the curtains close to prepare for the next act, and let us reflect on what we have seen. What it was then, it is now. Canada actually operates under this perpetual charter, but the royals and the deceivers who work for them make believe that elected officials are enacting laws. The same system is still in place. The key to the solution, or the way to contest this back then, as it is now, is to refute any law that is repugnant to natural law. The kings and queens have sworn an oath on the 1611 King James Bible to be defenders of the faith, so whatever contracts they have entered into, they must not be repugnant. But if they are, and everyone still agrees to uphold them, the royals are exonerated. What was meant to be checks and balances on the laws had been ignored. The kings and queens did whatever they wanted through threats or violence. Nothing has changed still to this day. If men and women don't object, they agree, and the Hudson Bay Company got away with it for 250 years, from 1670 till 1920 supposedly. We will dive in a little deeper and see what we may discover. How do monarchs maintain and justify their power of illusion? The divine right of kings, or divine right theory of kingship, is a political and religious doctrine of royal and political legitimacy. It asserts that a monarch is subject to no earthly authority, deriving his right to rule directly from the will of God. The king was in charge because God had chosen him. They also think they, as a king, are above the law. For those who defied the king, including lords, were punished and lost their land and title. Some kings would execute lords and mount their heads on pikes to show the power of the king. The king threatened lords and nobles into serving him using federal authority and power as a threat to make them follow him. Pretty much what is happening today in the Canada Corporation, as the Hares maintain the charter of Hudson Bay Corporation. An absolute monarchy is a form of dictatorship government in which an all-powerful king or queen rules a state. This form of government was popular in Europe toward the end of the medieval period, all the way up to 21st century. Rulers in an absolute monarchy had total control over their corporations. Most believed they had the divine right to rule, meaning that God created the monarchy they ruled over, and they alone were God's representative on earth. These monarchs ruled for life and power was passed down through bloodlines, meaning their children ruled after them, creating a dynasty. Causes of absolutism. Before the time of the all-powerful monarchs, Europe had decentralized governments, planned and created by kings. Invasions by Vikings and other barbarian groups were orchestrated in stealth. They created fear amongst the population. This created a perfect environment for these all-powerful leaders to rise. Effects of absolutism. Once absolute monarchs gained power, they began to consolidate or reinforce their power within their borders. They would set up large royal courts, which were an extended royal household, including all those who regularly attend to the monarch and the royal family. Monarchs did this in order to appear more powerful and to control the nobility. They also regulated religion to control the spread of ideas. If monarchs could control what the people were hearing, they could keep their power. Large bureaucracies were also created in order to control the economy. They use this today continually with their propaganda of wars to keep the people in perpetual fear. Fear is an effective force to control society. It is used to divide people in a society and validate racist/bigoted/homophobic/X ideas. Act 3 Repatriation of the Rupert's Land Act. And now, men and women, the two parts of the body will be rejoined into one recapitulation. There were two corporate entities running side by side, the Dominion, British North America, Canada, and the Hudson Bay Company. Next, we will see the Queen use her magic pen and her weapons of force to ensure she gets what she wants. Queen Victoria demanded the Hudson Bay Charter back. By making it a country called British North America, the Queen forced the HBC to be admitted into the newly formed country. Now the HBC Charter was given back to Her Majesty for the price of £12 million. Victoria got her piece of paper, but the men and women of the land had to pay for it, as usual. Some things never change. 31 July 1868, HBC had to surrender their charter to the Queen, and Her Majesty's successors and heirs in perpetuity. The Deed of Surrender or Rupert's Land and Northwestern Territory Order is an 1870 British order in council that transferred ownership of Rupert's Land and the Northwestern Territory from the United Kingdom to the newly created Dominion of Canada. The deed ended just over 200 years of Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, control over Rupert's Land and began Western Canadian expansion. Often confused with the Rupert's Land Act 1868, the deed is different as the Act only expressed that the United Kingdom and Canada permitted the transfer, but did not settle on the details of exchange with HBC, which were outlined in the Deed of Surrender. Rupert's Land Act 1868, 31 to 32 Vict. C 105 UK. Act 4 Statute Law Revision Act. On June 9, 1893, Queen Victoria pulls a rabbit out of her hat and unenacts the B&A Act, 26 years after she had formed it. The rabbit, or the country now called Canada, which Queen Victoria pulled out of her hat 26 years ago, hopped away. The B&A Act disappeared. The Dominion of British North America was removed by the Queen with her Statute Law Revision Act of 1893, but no one knew what she had done. Even today, no one knows except insiders. Statute Law Revision Act 1893, Enactment No. 3. Let the curtains fall so we can have an intermission and reflect on what it means that there is no Act, no Parliament, no Constitution, no de jure laws. The Queen Elizabeth II did not sign the laws into being in British Columbia or any other province or territory in Canada Corporation. Many have discovered that the Lieutenant Governor, who represents the Queen, also does not sign the laws into being. Zip. Nothing. It's all a grand illusion. The Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia is the viceregal representative of the Canadian monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. This vice was created in 1871 and has served the Crown ever since. The Lieutenant Governor from 2001-2007 was Iona Campagnolo. She was very wise, and she made a statement in one of her speeches where she removed herself from liability. She admitted that she did not sign any laws, and neither did the Queen whom she represented. Why? Because the laws are repugnant to natural law. Here is what Iona Campagnolo, Lieutenant Governor, said. As head of state, I have the same mandate as Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of Canada, that is to say, apart from a single reserve power to sustain democratic governance. None. Thus, Her Majesty is our head of state, while the Governor-General is the de equals facto head of state, and neither is in command of provincial or territorial jurisdiction. A head of state, however, is the CEO of the province, and is required to sign all state documents in the name of the people to render them into law. But neither Iona Campagnolo nor the Queen signed them. Abracadabra. There are no de jure laws in BC, or any of the provinces in the corporation called Canada. Now the curtains suddenly malfunction and come crashing down on the deceivers, sending them scurrying and the stagehands scrambling to get things righted. When you're in court, challenging the legal name game, the strawman/legal fictitious name, manifested by the issuance of the state's birth certificate after the child's physical birth, the judges will roll their eyes in many cases. When you start reading the words by Iona Campagnolo that related to the fact that she did not sign the laws, and neither did the Queen, judges panic. Lawyers may be confused, don't even understand what this is all about. The judges know you're challenging the jurisdiction of the court. The words of Iona Campagnolo and pondered, how can someone admit they have no power and then sign the documents into law? Judges, mayors, MPs, MLAs, police all assumed she was signing them. Many have found out later that she was not. A clerk of the court was signing them. That is, Iona Campagnolo was a very smart, no-nonsense lady who was exonerating herself from the whole scam and any liability. What she said in her speech was, I am supposed to be signing these documents into law, but I am not, and therefore there is no law. Why did the Queen not signing the laws? Because they are repugnant to natural law. The Queen's representative, Iona Campagnolo, was not signing them either. So, tax laws are not tax laws. They only exist inside the Hudson Bay Charter jurisdiction. The minute you step into natural law jurisdiction, or a higher jurisdiction, they don't apply. The full liability would land on the Queen and Lieutenant Governor in commerce law jurisdiction. The curtains have been secured, and the deceiver's show has been restored soon to the next act. Act 5, Repatriation of the Constitution. A new deceiver called Pierre Trudeau was on the stage and ready to maintain the fraud or lie for his master the Queen, Elizabeth II of England. Trudeau, the 15th Prime Minister of Canada, revived the B&A Act in an effort to continue the deception that de facto Canada status as a country with a legitimate parliament and a constitution was a de jure, and the ability to make its own laws de jure and govern itself, which was all smoke and mirrors, as you will learn the facts. To solve their problem was, he had to call the Act by a different name, because the B&A Act had been repealed by Queen Victoria, and that made it impossible to revivify. There was no mechanism to restore the B&A Act, because the B&A Act created the Parliament, and the Parliament had been virtually dissolved, so they couldn't even pass an act to create themselves. The Queen's deceivers had the more powerful legalise or weasel words. Trudeau was ordered to name the B&A Act to the Constitution Act of 1982, adding in a Charter and Bill of Rights and Freedoms, which you will all learn were smoke and mirror, as they actually removed your unalienable rights. Here are facts of the Charter of Rights and Freedom you may not yet know or comprehend. Charter of so-called rights are privileges and can be removed. Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada Corporation are FALSC. So when you refer to them as rights, you are DCEIVING yourself and others. TECHing them FALSC information. The Charter of Rights has never been ratified and is not in play. Section 58 and 59 and 23.1. Section 23.1 refers to language laws in Quebec if authorized into law. This would give parents legal rights to educate their children in the language of their choice. Must be satisfied first to be ratified. Has never been satisfied by Quebec. Section 58 and 59 must be repealed and replaced. This proved that the so-called Charter of Rights has never been ratified, and that we sovereigns have no rights. It's proven right here. Something you should all ponder and wonder why the leaders and politicians do not tell you the truth. Part 7, Sections 58. Section 58, Commencement. Subject to Section 59, this Act shall come into force on a day to be fixed by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. This is the section that introduces a subject that needs to be satisfied. Satisfied meaning discharge of an obligation. Section 59. Commencement of paragraph 23 to 1. In respect of Quebec. 1. Paragraph 23 to 1 shall come into force in respect of Quebec on a day to be fixed by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. This is the introduction of the subject and refers you to the specific section that needs to be satisfied. 2. Authorization of Quebec. A proclamation under subsection 1 shall be issued only where authorized by the Legislative Assembly or Government of Quebec. This means that subsection 1 can only be satisfied by the sitting Government of Quebec. 3. Repeal of this section. This section may be repealed on the day paragraph 23 to Onna comes into force in respect of Quebec, and this Act amended and renumbered, consequentially upon the repeal of this section by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. This is the section that says that once all the subjects have been satisfied, Section 59 will be repealed, and a new proclamation will be made to bring the Charter into force. Section 23 to 1. Citizens of Canada. Atho's first language learned and still understood is that of the English or French linguistic minority population of the province in which they reside. Have the right to have their children receive primary and secondary school instruction in that language in that province. This is the section that says that if your first language is English, the province must provide you with primary and secondary education in English. Part 1. Section 32, Application of Charter. 1. This Charter applies a. To the Parliament and Government of Canada in respect of all matters within the authority of Parliament, including all matters relating to the Yukon Territory and Northwest Territories. And this section covers Parliament and government employees. B. To the Legislature and Government of each province in respect of all matters within the authority of the Legislature of each province. This section covers Parliament and government employees provincially. Exemption. 2. Notwithstanding subsection 1, Section 15 shall not have effect until 3 years after this section comes into force. This section states that Section 15, equality before and under law, and equal protection and benefit of law, needs 3 years of Charter ratification before it can come into play. Section 24, enforcement of guaranteed rights and freedoms. 1. Anyone whose rights or freedoms, as guaranteed by this Charter, have been infringed or denied may apply to a court of competent jurisdiction to obtain such remedy as the court considers appropriate and just in the circumstances. This section means that anyone who is covered in the application section has a right to seek justice. Exclusion of evidence bringing administration of justice into disrepute. 2. Where, in proceedings under subsection 1, a court concludes that evidence was obtained in a manner that infringed or denied any rights or freedoms guaranteed by this Charter, the evidence shall be excluded if it is established that, having regard to all these circumstances, the admission of it in the proceedings would bring the administration of justice into disrepute. This section protects anyone covered in the application section from having their rights infringed upon during an investigation and/or trial. Act 6 Queen Elizabeth's Proclamation. With the help from Trudeau, the Constitution Act, the Queen pulled, and is still pulling, a string of scarves from her sleeve. Scarves and more scarves many miles long as the Queen smiles confidently. This is perhaps the most clever trick of all. Proclamation of April 17, 1982. Of particular interest is this sentence for the Queen's proclamation. Now know you that we, by and with the advice our Privy Council for Canada, do by this our proclamation declare that the Constitution Act 1982 shall, subject to Section 59 thereof, come into force on the 17th day of April in the year of our Lord 1982. Here is an enlarged copy of the Proclamation 1982. If you notice at the top Queen Elizabeth's signature, and then as well as the Minister of Justice, Jean Chrétien, as you clearly identify from the document. This is where it gets very interesting. Queen Elizabeth never signed at the bottom of this document. We are all contracts signed with our signature / or autograph at the end of a contract, indicating that the parties have read, understood, and agreed to the terms and conditions outlined in the document. Signing at the top means you have removed yourself from liability. With your wet ink signature or autograph at the end of the entire contract verifies you have read and agree to all the terms in the contract. Furthermore, all parties must sign with the same instrument. When signing a document or agreement, putting your initials on all pages before the last page where your full name and signature is requested is a common practice. Initialing each page serves as a way to indicate that you have reviewed and agreed to the contents of the entire document. It helps to prevent any unauthorized modifications or substitutions of pages after you have signed the document. By initialing each page, you are essentially confirming your acceptance of the terms and conditions stated throughout the document. We are told to sign at the end, where the signature blocks are usually placed. Magicians use a variety of techniques, including psychology, misdirection, and sleight of hand, to create the illusion. Now this brings us back to what Iona Victoria Campagnolo had said in her speech. The Lieutenant Governor from 2000 and 2007 was Iona Campagnolo. She was very wise, and she made a statement in one of her speeches where she removed herself from liability. She admitted that she did not sign any laws, and neither did the Queen whom she represented. Why? We have done some research on this, as Dallas Hills has brought this to our attention over the last 15 years. Dallas has also published videos on this important research, and produced numerous videos on the fact Queen Elizabeth never signed the Constitutional Act of 1982. Dallas Hills also has questioned Queen Victoria's signing of this so important document that supposedly created the dominion called Canada. How could this be factual when there is no signature on the BNA Act? So in fact, this is just more evidence that the entire de facto government has never had any authority to govern, let alone make any policies. Now with this evidence, there is much confusion about Queen Victoria's role in signing the BNA Act of 1867. The British North America Act received royal assent on March 29, 1867, but it was not signed by Queen Victoria herself. It states that when the Governor-General assents to a bill in the Queen's name, he sends an authentic copy of the Act, implying that the Governor-General, not the Queen, signs the Act, and seem to suggest that Queen Victoria was involved in the process, but they don't explicitly state that she signed the Act. It's worth noting that provides the text of the Act, but it doesn't mention Queen Victoria's signature. So, to summarize, while Queen Victoria played a role in the process, there's no conclusive evidence to suggest that she personally signed the BNA Act of 1867. Now in regards to Queen Elizabeth, this is all we have been able to find as an explanation. The Canada Act 1982, which was signed by Queen Elizabeth II at the top, but not at the bottom. This is an interesting exception to the typical convention of signing at the end of a document. In this case, the Queen's signature at the top of the document is known as a broad seal, which is a formal way of authenticating a document in accordance with royal protocol. The broad seal is usually affixed to the top of the document, and it signifies the Queen's approval and authorization of the contents. So, while it might seem unusual to us, the Queen's signature at the top of the Canada Act 1982 is a deliberate choice that follows traditional royal protocol. If men and women accept this as a legal contract, then they have been deceived again. The operative words here are subject to Section 59 of the Constitution Act. Now Section 59 defers to Section 23 of the Constitution Act. And what is 23? It is the language issue. So, the people of Quebec would have to agree that in their province, children may be educated in any language that their parents desire. In Quebec, this is never going to fly. They will not sign off on a language issue, and the Queen knew it. So Section 59/23 is the condition for which the Constitution Act of 1982 will come into force and effect. And that did not happen. The Queen's magic words are the strongest of all. So, there the Constitution Act. To add more facts, the Meech Lake Accord of 1987 and the Charlottetown Accord of 1992. Both failed. Pierre Trudeau came out of retirement to oppose the Accord as it would weaken federal power. Simple facts is there has been no ratification. No matter what anyone says about Canada's Constitution Act, it is sitting in limbo subject to Section 59. Section 59 says, when 23 is satisfied, there has to be another proclamation, and this section has to be not only repealed, but disappeared. All that Trudeau did does not come into effect until Section 59 has been satisfied, so that takes us back to the Hudson Bay Charter. And the one who owns the Hudson Bay Charter is Queen Elizabeth II, or someone in her family. When she mentions the word Canada in her proclamation, the Queen is not talking about a country. She is talking about the Hudson Bay Corporation, or Charter. Whoever owns the Royal Charter Corporation owns all of the resources, licensing fees, fines, and taxes extorted from the men and women of Canada. Now know you Constitution Act 1982 shall, subject to Section 59 thereof, come into force on the 17th day of April in the year of our Lord 1900 and 82. The 1982 Constitution with its Bill of Rights never came into force. That is why, when you go into court and try to assert your freedom rights by way of the Constitution, they love it. They know that the Constitution does not exist and you just gave them jurisdiction. The monarchs perceived that if this magic trick were exposed, it might prove too inflammatory. So, the royal magicians have been trying to change the name and connotations of the BNA/Constitution Act going all the way back to 1867. They want to pretend like the 1867 DNA Act was never there. And this new Constitution Act in 1982 has always been here, but it has not. Another interesting part of the Queen's proclamation is this: of all which our loving subjects and all other whom these presents may concern are hereby required to take notice, and to govern themselves accordingly. Queen Elizabeth is talking to two sets of people here, my subjects and all others who are not my subjects. You are free to not be my subject. You, who are outside my subjects, and still want to interact with this document, whom these presents may concern, you must govern yourselves accordingly. This document tells where Canada actually is. Until Section 59 is satisfied, there are no laws, no government, no acts, no parliament, and no legislature. All there is whatever they can get with their Hudson Bay Charter. This show is complete. We always had the lawful, unalienable right for self-determination. We can create our own contract, charter, constitution that removes a de facto system and replace with a de jure system. Please share so we may end this fraud.
Canada. A land of endless opportunities, extraordinary beauty, and prosperity. A place that is known for kindness, benevolence, and generosity. A place that is built on courage, integrity, and truth. Or so it appears. Yet, something doesn't feel right. Can you feel it? The underlying sense of unease and discomfort. That feeling when you know you're being deceived, and you're wondering, how big of a lie could it be? For how long have we been lied to? How much of all this is possibly a show? A well-played theatrical performance? Or maybe it's all an illusion? Is it time to see what is behind the curtain? Is it time to resist the control system? To unplug from the matrix and switch it off. In 1759, at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, Great Britain defeated France and renamed the colony to the province of Quebec. In 1776, the 13 British colonies to the south declared independence from Great Britain and formed the United States of America. In 1791, the Constitutional Act divided the province of Quebec into the provinces of Lower Canada and Upper Canada. In 1840, the Act of Union merged the colonies of Upper Canada and Lower Canada into the Province of Canada. In 1864, at the Quebec Conference, delegates from each colony discussed the desire to form a federal union, while each province would retain its independence and autonomy under the umbrella of a constitutional monarchy. From 1861 to 1865, during the American Civil War between the Union, the North, and the Confederacy, the South, Great Britain built warships for the Confederacy, armed with British weapons. Many merchant ships of the Union were destroyed by the Confederate Army in Great Britain. When Lincoln won the war, he sought claims from Great Britain, but Great Britain refused. The Union even threatened to declare war and annex British North America in 1866. In 1866, John A. Macdonald, chairman of the delegates from the colonies, participated in finalizing the Kingdom of Canada Bill at the London Conference to draft the BNA Act. Great Britain had a dilemma: risk a possible war with the United States of America, pay reparations for the sinking of the Union's ships, grant the colonies in Canada self-governance. Queen Victoria needed a clever solution. Lord Thring's brilliant scheme: keep the Canadian colonies and make them pay the reparations to the United States of America through taxation, while deceiving the colonies into thinking that they govern themselves. On March 29, 1867, the British North America Act received royal assent, meaning it was formally approved by the court in Chancery. It went into effect on July 1, 1867, and created a united colony known as the Dominion of Canada. Until 1982, July 1st was celebrated as Dominion Day. Since 1982, July 1st has been celebrated as Canada Day, when the BNA Act was renamed the Constitution Act. Let us take a closer look at the original BNA Act 1867. This is the intended preamble. And it states, by reason of the request of the colonies for federal government, it is expedient, therefore, that they have laws and regulations to guide them. This is the modified preamble. And it states, whereas the provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick have expressed their desire to be federally united into one dominion under the Crown. The 1889 Interpretation Act defined a British possession to be any part of a dominion, and it defined the term colony to be any part of a dominion. The Dominion of Canada was clearly a colony of Great Britain and not an independent country. The colony did not confederate in 1867. The BNA Act was not brought back to Canada for the United Colony to sign and ratify. The original BNA Act is located in the United Kingdom and has always been the property of the United Kingdom and not Canada. Section 2 of the BNA Act 1867 declares that the provisions of this act extend to the heirs and successors of the kings and queens of Great Britain. Section 109 of the BNA Act 1867 states that all lands, minerals, and royalties belonging to the several provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick at the Union shall belong to the several provinces of Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. All natural resources belong to the various colonies, with exceptions as per Section 109. More land was to be added to the Dominion of Canada through use. If the Dominion could use the land, then they could claim the land. In 1868, through the Rupert's Land Act, use of land was purchased from the Hudson's Bay Company. In 1870, through the Manitoba Act. And in 1871, through the British Columbia Terms of Union. In 1871, the Treaty of Washington was concluded. It settled the claims between the United Kingdom and the United States of America, even though the United Kingdom never admitted any wrongdoing. However, it is interesting to see whose names also show up. Sir John Alexander MacDonald, Knight Commander of the Most Honorable Order of the Bath, a member of Her Majesty's Privy Council for Canada, and Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Her Majesty's Dominion of Canada, and Montague Bernard. The Privy Council is a formal body of advisors to the monarch of the United Kingdom, in this case, Queen Victoria, meaning John A. Macdonald represented Great Britain. In 1867, Macdonald was appointed, and not voted in, as Prime Minister by the Governor-General at the time, Lord Monck. In 1854, Macdonald, a Freemason since 1844, became a member of the Order of the Masonic Knights Templar. Macdonald got engaged to the much younger Susan Agnes Bernard, cousin of Montague Bernard, who worked with British royalty in London in December of 1866. They married in February of 1867, 1 month before the BNA Act was signed. John A. Macdonald was the one who helped Queen Victoria achieve her grand scheme of deceiving the colonists into thinking they were now self-governed and had confederated. He received generous titles, appointments in the British monarchy, and a much younger second wife in addition to his annual salary of $5,000 equivalent to $125,000 today, in return for a betrayal of the colonists. In the Treaty of Washington, 1871, John A. Macdonald agreed to give the San Juan Islands and Point Roberts to the United States of America, in addition to granting equal rights to the fisheries for 10 years, because he was representing Great Britain and not the Dominion of Canada. How can he be called the father of Confederation, and a hero by some, when a confederation was never achieved, and when he in fact betrayed the colonists? By means of the Letters Patent Revocation Act, 1878, the British monarchy instituted the office of Governor-General of the Dominion on a permanent basis. The most important part is found in Section 9 of the Act. The British monarchy declared full power and authority through letters patent, including their heirs and successors. Letters patent are an official declaration used to grant patent rights by the Crown and Chancery to officially grant titles and office to people, or make other declarations. With this Letters Patent Revocation Act, Section 2 of the BNA Act, 1867, was now redundant. Recall, the provisions of this act extend to the heirs and successors of the kings and queens of Great Britain. June 19, 1893, the Statute Law Revision Act was passed. With it, Queen Victoria explicitly repealed Section 2 of the BNA Act 1867. This Statute Law Revision Act, 1893, was never repealed after it was passed, and Section 2 of the BNA Act, 1867, was never reenacted. Queen Victoria died on January 22, 1901, from a brain hemorrhage while residing at Osborne House. Interestingly, during the same time as Guglielmo Marconi fired up a very powerful radio wave antenna just 12 miles away. With her death, the BNA Act died as well, due to the repeal of Section 2. Did this remove the British monarchy? No, because of the Letters Patent Revocation Act, 1878. Did this end the Dominion of Canada? No, because of the Letters Patent Revocation Act, 1878, and the Interpretation Act, 1889. Recall the definition of the term colony. The Dominion of Canada and the British monarchy carried on under Edward VII. More land was added via use to the Dominion of Canada between 1898 and 1905. In 1898, through the Yukon Territory Act. In 1905, through the Alberta Act. And in 1905, through the Saskatchewan Act. Who owned the land of the Dominion of Canada? Did the land of the Dominion of Canada belong to the monarch? No. The Crown and Chancery held the title to all British lands, including the Dominion of Canada. The Crown and Chancery is the Department of Lands of Britain. It was established by the Privy Council. The Crown is a corporation sole. It represents the state in all its aspects. It can be used to refer to the office of the monarch or the monarchy as institutions. It can be used to refer to the rule of law or the functions of executive, legislative, and judicial governance. This is why all government and public land was called Crown land until it was granted by means of a Crown grant, also referred to as a land patent. The monarch was just a figurehead. The king or queen was not a sovereign any longer because they did not own the land. The governor-general had more authority. He was also a corporation sole, given the sole government of the colony, with the assistance of members of the Privy Council and appointed by the Crown and Chancery. What is the difference between a monarch and a sovereign? Authority of government originates in the title to land. A king or queen is a sovereign when he or she has absolute authority over the land, and thus absolute power. A king or queen becomes a monarch when he or she does not have absolute authority over the land. The king or queen alone has no power. The title to all British lands was held by the Crown and Chancery and not by the king or queen. All government and public land was called Crown land. The Governor-General had sole authority to govern Canada as a corporation sole with the advice of the Privy Council. He was appointed by the commission created in 1878 and not by the King or the Queen or the House of Commons or the House of Lords. In September of 1926, Russell Rogers Smith of the Native Sons of Canada, a movement aimed at fostering national spirit, creating Canadian nationality, adopting a Canadian flag, and having more autonomy, presented a resolution to the Prime Minister, Mackenzie King. One main request of that resolution was the necessity of elevating Canada constitutionally to the status of a sovereign nation and to confer on Canada an equality of status with Great Britain. It requested an equal and independent sovereignty under the Crown of Canada. Another request was that Great Britain should not be allowed to make Canada pay for any claims that may arise out of Great Britain's defense actions. Another important request was that all natural resources of Canada belong to the people of Canada and not Great Britain. The resolution further requested that the roles and authority of the Governor-General be fundamentally changed for the benefit of Canada. As we will see, it was the work of Russell Rogers Smith that would have paved the path to real freedom. In October of 1926, at the Imperial Conference in London, led by Lord Arthur J. Balfour, Mackenzie King, and representatives of the other dominions of Great Britain met to discuss and determine the status between Great Britain and the dominions of Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and the Irish Free State. The report concluded that the dominions are autonomous communities within the British Empire, equal in status, in no way subordinate one to another in any aspect of their domestic or external affairs, though united by a common allegiance to the Crown, and freely associated as members of the British Commonwealth of Nations. This was scheduled to be made law with the enactment of the Statute of Westminster on December 11, 1931. Prior to the enactment of the Statute of Westminster, the Government of Canada was composed of a Governor-General and a select committee of the Imperial Privy Council, one of which headed the Supreme Court of Canada. Any member of the Imperial Privy Council was a member of the Government of Canada. The House of Commons, the Senate of Canada, the Privy Council for Canada, which was appointed by the Governor-General, and the Lieutenant Governors of the provinces were to aid and advise the Governor-General in the government. The Governor-General was the sole government. Neither the Legislative Assembly nor the House of Commons were responsible to the Canadian people. They were responsible to the Governor-General only. Each Lieutenant Governor, appointed by the Governor-General, was also a corporation sole, acting as the representative of the Governor-General, and not as a representative of elected representatives or the people. As we will see, the Statute of Westminster is the most important document in the history of the landmass known as Canada. We will only look at the three key sections of the Statute of Westminster that apply to the Dominion of Canada. These are: Section 2 removed colonial law from the Dominion of Canada. Recall, the Dominion of Canada was defined as a colony of Great Britain. No law made by the Parliament of a Dominion is void just because it may not be in accordance with British law. This section does not apply to Australia because Australia had a so-called constitution in 1901 and was not a dominion in 1931. Let's look at Section 11 before looking at Section 7. Section 11 of the Statute of Westminster severed the connection between the Dominion and a colony of Great Britain. What does this mean? The key word is notwithstanding. It means Section 11 overrides the Interpretation Act of 1889, which defined the term colony. The provinces were not joined as one colony of Great Britain any longer, and each province was also not a colony of Great Britain any longer. Who owned the land now? The people of each province naturally took ownership of the land. This also removed the Governor-General because the Crown and Chancery lost the allodial title to the land. There is no intermediate status between that of a colony and that of a sovereign state. No confederation happened because the provinces had never been sovereign states. Section 11 finally raised each province of Canada from the position of a colony to that of a sovereign state. Section 7 is misleading in how it deals with the applicability of this statute to Canada. Subsection 1 attempts to exclude the BNA Act from this statute. However, the BNA Act was only a statute, a guide of the Imperial Parliament to aid the Governor General. It could only be effective if there is a duly appointed Governor General. See Section 12 of the BNA Act, 1867. Since the Crown and Chancery, who appoints the Governor General, gave up a laudable title to the land, thanks to Section 11, there can be no more Governor General. The result is, this subsection is redundant. Subsection 2 clarifies that Section 2 of the statute removing colonial law also applies to any of the provinces. This makes each province a sovereign state, nation, or country, because confederation never happened. Only sovereign states can join into a confederation, and the provinces were not sovereign until the Statute of Westminster was passed. Subsection 3 clarifies that the provinces can only act within their boundaries and cannot impose laws on any other province. But what is the Parliament of Canada now? Is Canada defined? In summary, Section 2 removed colonial law from the Dominion of Canada as it was a colony of Great Britain. Section 7 removed colonial law from each province. Section 11 removed the status of colony, which immediately ended the Dominion of Canada. It also immediately removed the Governor General. There is no intermediate status between that of a colony and that of a sovereign state. Sovereignty and the ownership of land go hand in hand. No confederation happened because the provinces had never been sovereign states. Each province of Canada was now for the first time a sovereign state. This status has not changed since December 11, 1931. No province has held a constitutional convention. No province has seated a de jure, lawful government. Extremely important. Every politician, every governor general, every prime minister, every law, every act, everything has been illegitimate since December 11th, 1931. Anything that was passed after this date is not applicable to the people of each province. Has freedom been hiding in plain sight for over 90 years? What happened after the Statute of Westminster was passed? Did the people in each province hold constitutional conventions and seat a de jure government? Sadly, no. Russell Rogers Smith said in the 1940s, "What does the future hold? Is Canada to become an armed camp, each at the other's throat? Or can we unite to create a federal union, mutually adopting a constitution?" It is very likely that many people did not comprehend at the time what the Statute of Westminster had actually achieved. The Great Depression also impacted many people who were desperately looking for help. In addition, it is likely that many of the politicians at the time did also not comprehend what the passing of the Statute of Westminster really meant. It seems that those who did know simply continued as if nothing had happened. After all, there was a lot to lose. Recall Section 109 of the BNA Act. In 1936, the Parliament of Canada attempted to revise the Statute of Westminster. They wanted to revise Section 7 of the statute to give the Parliament of Canada the power to enact a federal constitution and to continue the BNA Act until such constitution was in place. Did the Parliament have this power? Was the Parliament legitimate? Parliament also tried to amend the BNA Act. However, the BNA Act cannot be implemented without a Governor-General. The Governor-General used to be appointed by the Crown and Chancery, but the Crown and Chancery lost the title to the land. From the official website of the Governor-General of Canada. Until 1931, Canada's Governor-General was chosen by the Sovereign. This changed when the Canadian government began to make recommendations for the position. Who was the Sovereign? How were Governors-General appointed? What changed in 1931? Who gave the Canadian government the authority to appoint the Governor-General? Did they simply assume this authority? Could they issue letters patent? In 1945, Walter Cool, a member of Parliament from Alberta, addressed the House of Commons and presented a detailed speech about the constitutional problems. He clearly outlined the current status and the actions that should be taken. However, no action was taken. In 1947, Prime Minister Mackenzie King issued letters patent, appointing a Governor-General. These letters patent were signed only by Mackenzie King. To this day, only the Lord High Commissioner of Great Britain, the Crown and Chancery, can issue letters patent. Nobody else has the power or authority to issue letters patent. The last ones that were issued are dated March 23, 1931. In 1948, the Income Tax Act was implemented by an illegitimate Parliament of Canada and signed by an illegitimate Governor-General, Harold Alexander of Tunis. In 1952, the Royal Style and Titles Act was enacted by an illegitimate Parliament of Canada, in which the Parliament of Canada assented that Elizabeth II can proclaim herself to be the Queen in right of Canada.
The moment the Queen puts her signature on this document, it becomes law. It will be witnessed later. The Constitution is now home. A fanfare in the background, as you can hear.
In 1976, Walter Cool, a member of Parliament from Alberta, wrote a letter to René Lévesque, Premier-elect of Quebec, explaining that Quebec does not need to seek a formal separation because the province has been completely independent and sovereign since December 11, 1931, just like every other province. How can you be divorced when you have never been married? In 1982, Pierre Elliott Trudeau initiated the grand deception that is called the Constitution Act of Canada, also known as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. An illusion, as we will see, which many people strongly believe to be factual truth. Trudeau is said to have patriated, which means to transfer legislation to an autonomous country from its previous mother country, the defunct and meaningless BNA Act 1867 to Canada. Why did he only bring a photocopy? Why does the original BNA Act 1867 still reside in the parliamentary archives of Great Britain? Trudeau urged all provinces to ratify, which means to give formal consent to make something official, the document, so that Canadians could enjoy their new constitution as soon as possible. Did all the provinces sign? Was it ever ratified? Section 58 of the Canada Act, 1982, states that this act would only come into force by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General, and only if the conditions of Section 59 were met. Section 59 is equally important to comprehend. Subsection 1. Paragraph 23, 1. A shall come into force in respect of Quebec on a day to be fixed by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. Subsection 2. A proclamation under subsection 1 shall be issued only where authorized by the Legislative Assembly or Government of Quebec. Subsection 3. This section may be repealed on the day paragraph 23, 1. A comes into force in respect of Quebec and this act amended and renumbered consequentially upon the repeal of this section by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. The key phrase here is in respect of Quebec. Section 23. Minority language educational rights. Citizens of Canada, whose first language learned and still understood is that of the English or French linguistic minority population, have the right to have their children receive primary and secondary school instruction in that language in that province. Recall Section 59, subsection 3, in respect of Quebec. This section may be repealed on the day paragraph 23, 1. A comes into force in respect of Quebec and this act amended and renumbered consequentially upon the repeal of this section by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. This means that only Quebec would lose their educational right in the French language. What were the steps to ratify and enact the Canada Act, 1982? 1. All provinces would need to sign Schedule B of the Act, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 2. Quebec would need to authorize a proclamation to enact Section 23, 1A of the Act. 3. Section 23, 1A would be enacted through a proclamation. 4. Section 59, 3 would be enacted through a proclamation to repeal Section 59 and renumber the Act. 5. Section 58 would be enacted through a proclamation to pass the Act. A total of 3 proclamations were needed to pass the Act. Which of these steps have been completed? None. But what about the proclamation from 1982? From the Royal Proclamation, 1982. Now know you that we, by and with the advice our Privy Council for Canada, do by this our proclamation declare that the Constitution Act 1982 shall, subject to Section 59 thereof, come into force. Recall, subject to Section 59 means 2 proclamations must be made before the final proclamation to pass the Act, Section 58, could be made. This Royal Proclamation, 1982, is only a proclamation stating that there will be a proclamation in the future. Nothing was passed. Nothing was enacted. There is no Constitution. There is no Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Royal Proclamation, 1983, had nothing to do with the passing of the Canada Act, 1982. This act simply converted the status of Aboriginal people from sovereigns to persons. Even the 1987 Meech Lake Accord and the 1992 Charlottetown Accord failed to enact the Canada Act, 1982, also known as the Constitution Act, 1982. Reminder, everything since December 11th, 1931 has been illegitimate, null and void. Since the fraud has obviously continued, why would Quebec not speak up and call it out? Maybe the over $12 billion in equalization payments that Quebec has received on average each year has played a role. Let's take a look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 1. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in its subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society, This gives the government the option to ignore the charter, and it is why the courts often side with the government. Section 7. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. What is a person? Section 32. This charter applies to the Parliament and Government of Canada, and to the legislature and government of each province. Does the charter apply to the living men and women, or only to persons? A charter is a reservation of a ship, or a written grant, by which a corporation is founded and its rights and privileges are defined. A ship needs to be chartered to land it and reflag it. A person is a legal fiction. A corporation is also a legal fiction, but not a person. The charter was meant to create a ship at sea, which was intended to bring maritime law onto the land. Through persons, the living men and women would be brought under maritime law jurisdiction. This is why all provinces needed to sign the charter. A charter differs from a constitution in this that the former is granted by a foreign government, while the latter is established by the people themselves. There is no lawfully established independent country called Canada. There is a geographical area that is comprised of sovereign nations, also known as provinces. How exactly is Canada defined in the Interpretations Act, 1985? Canada includes the internal waters of Canada and the territorial sea of Canada. Canadian waters includes the territorial sea of Canada and the internal waters of Canada. Internal waters means the internal waters of Canada and includes the airspace above and the bed and subsoil below those waters. Territorial sea means the territorial sea of Canada and includes the airspace above and the seabed and subsoil below that sea. The land is not included anywhere. Why? Because they lost access to the land when the Dominion ended with the Statute of Westminster, when the land was naturally returned to the people. Through the person, the all-caps name on all forms, IDs, licenses, passports, birth certificates, etc., you have submitted yourself to operate within maritime law. You have only those privileges that the corporation grants to you. Those do not include unalienable rights. What is the solution? How do we get out of this? Do we want to get out of this? Educate yourself. Learn these facts. Break the patterns and the indoctrination, like celebrating Canada Day and waving the Canadian flag. Educate your children because they are the ones building the future. Using the Socratic method to break through the brainwashing, asking simple questions instead of presenting facts, educate your family, friends, and neighbors. Offer help, kindness, and patience to those that have awoken from the deep sleep and are desperately looking for answers and support. When the people in each sovereign province are ready, a constitutional convention will be held to elect delegates and agree on a provincial constitution, accepted by a majority of the people, after which a de jure, lawful government is seated. This will all need to be done without corporate interference of any kind, for example, bar-carded attorneys. Only after each province has been properly established with a constitution and a de jure government, all provinces can then, if they desire to do so, hold a convention to discuss a federation of the provinces. We have been living under communist tyranny as slaves within a corrupt, corporate, yet illegitimate system based on maritime law for decades. Some people like it, but most don't. Waving and displaying the Canadian flag is not a symbol of freedom and free spirit, because it is the symbol and trademark of an evil corporation. When you wave this flag, you are submitting yourself to the color of laws of the corporation. For many years, people did not want to hear the truth. The truth and its speakers were ridiculed and silenced. Lately, though, more and more people are suffering at the hand of communism, and they do not like it. They see that something is deeply wrong. Since the people on the landmass known as Canada have been indoctrinated for decades and conditioned to be obedient slaves of the system, many may have to suffer immensely to be broken enough to accept the truth and to have the will to change. If recent worldwide events are any indication, then nothing can stop what is coming.
You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.